Hey, folks. Erick Stakelbeck here. Welcome to the Watchman Newscast live stream. We try to bring you a brand new live stream every week, usually on Wednesday, sometimes on Thursday. I'm looking at our little chat bar here on the side of the screen. We've already got people from all over the world joining us. This is going to be good. And we will be going until 5 p.m. Eastern time. Of course, it's 4 p.m. Eastern time right now. We have a lot to talk about. You might have heard about this little election going on in the nation of Israel right now. We are certainly going to talk about that. Benjamin Netanyahu appears to be on the verge of yet another election victory. Folks, Bibi is already the longest running prime minister in Israeli history. Remember, his first term was between 1996 and 1999. And then again, he served 12 consecutive years between 2009 and 2021. Over the past year plus, he's been in the opposition, and now it looks like he is on the verge. He is on the precipice of once again being Israel's leader. As I come to you at 4 p.m. Eastern time on Wednesday, November 2nd, again, the election was held yesterday in Israel on Tuesday, November 1st. But as of today, Wednesday, November 2nd, we have 4 p.m. now Eastern, about 90%, if not a little bit more, of all votes tallied. And it appears that Bibi has an almost insurmountable lead at this point. Now, key thing here, we have to hedge a little bit because Yair Lapid, who is Netanyahu's main opposition here, who is the current interim Israeli prime minister, Lapid has yet to concede, and he says he's going to wait till every last vote is counted. Well, as I mentioned a minute ago, not every vote apparently has been counted yet, but things are looking very good for Bibi right now. Hey, things are looking good for my Philadelphia Phillies as well. A big day in Israel, a big day in my hometown of Philadelphia. Had to wear my Phillies colors here. Old school, 1980 world champions. I was 4 years old. I barely remember the parade that year. But hopefully we have another parade this year, with apologies to all of my Texas and Houston friends, as the Phillies are up 2-1 on the Houston Astros. Now, you might be saying, who cares? I'm here for Israel. I'm here for the Middle East, and that's what we'll focus on. But we like to have a little bit of fun here once in a while on the Watchman Newscast live stream. Nothing wrong with that. Okay, here is the state of play in the Israel elections. And we're going to talk about this today, folks, from a lot of different angles. Okay, Bibi appears to be the winner. What does this mean for Israel? What does it mean for the region, for the Middle East? What does it mean for the Israel-U.S. relationship? What does it mean for the relationship between Israel and American Jews, who largely lean towards the liberal side, Democrat side, and many aren't fond of Bibi? And lastly, what does it mean for that Iran nuclear threat and a potential Middle East war? We're going to break it all down today. Also, wanted to mention this threat. Apparently, U.S. and Saudi officials are saying that Iran may be planning an attack against energy infrastructure, I'm thinking oil, in Saudi Arabia. Not only that, also plotting attacks reportedly against Iraqi Kurdistan. Of course, the Kurds have been U.S. allies through the years. And two things here at work, folks. Number one, Iran is trying to deflect attention from those widespread protests that have now spread to every major city in Iran. Hey, they're still going on. They started September 16th. They have not slowed down. But secondly, Iran, again, trying to deflect, is blaming the Saudis and blaming the Kurds for stirring up these protests. Well, the Iranian regime can look no further than the mirror as to why thousands of Iranians are once again in the streets protesting, demonstrating against this wicked regime. I do not use that word lightly, folks. A wicked, evil regime, not the Iranian people. It is the Iranian government, the Iranian regime, that has the people under its jackboot. It is an Islamo-fascist regime, a radical Islamic jihadist regime, and the Iranian people, the average person on the street in Iran, is the main victim of the regime. We see that again, once again, over the past month plus with these protests, where hundreds of protesters have been killed by the regime in the streets. Okay, we'll get to all of that. I want to break down the current numbers in Israel for the election. I'm just going to read them here for you off my phone. Real quick, before I do that, greetings to everyone. Just giving everyone a little shout out here. We have people from around the world right now, from across the United States, usually from 6 continents, all here with us on the Watchman Newscast live stream. Welcome, everyone. Before we are done at 5 p.m. Eastern time today, we will have thousands of people with us. We have well over 1,000 right now with us. Pretty nice, from all around the world. We are linked together here as watchmen and women on the wall, as brothers and sisters in Christ in many cases, for all those followers of Jesus, fellow followers of Jesus who are watching right now. And it's going to be good. So let's break down the selection result real quick. Here is what we have, folks. Here's the state of play. People are saying in the comments, Bibi has won. He's right there. I mean, it looks almost like a certainty that Bibi is going to be the winner. But folks, I have to be responsible. I have to wait until victory is officially declared by Netanyahu. Lapid concedes. That's less important to me than Netanyahu saying it's a done deal, we won. And the entire vote is, I don't want to see the kind of nonsense and shenanigans that we've seen here in the United States, sadly, with our elections in recent years. So let's see, all the votes are counted, and then we can say, okay, boom, it's a done deal. But I can tell you right now, things are very, very close for Bibi. He looks like the guy. He looks like the winner here. Here are the numbers. Benjamin Netanyahu's with almost 90% of all votes tallied. And by the way, do you remember the days? I'm old enough to remember the days when an election was held and we actually knew the results that night before we went to bed in many cases. Now elections and the results seem to stretch out over several days, even weeks. Kind of strange how that all developed over the past few years. Okay, Benjamin Netanyahu's Likud party right now is projected to win 32 seats. The next closest competitor is Yair Lapid, the current prime minister, his Yesh Atid party, with 24 seats. So Bibi has outpaced him. The Likud has outpaced him by 8 seats. That's pretty good, no doubt, pretty healthy margin. Now, bear this in mind. Israeli politics can be a bit confusing. Last week here, on the newscast, it aired on Friday, October 28th. We had an Israel election preview. Folks, if you missed that, I encourage you to check that out under newscast. It's in our archives. We interviewed our good friends Alex Trayman and Ruthie Bloom from jns.org, a great site, some great political analysis from them, and they really explained how the Israeli political system works. Here's the short of it. And again, check that out in our archives. While you're there, be sure to subscribe and click the notification bell so you get alerts every time a new update is posted. By the way, we need just under 2,000 more subscribers to reach that 500,000 mark. A fun milestone for our team. We've worked hard at it, trying to do the Lord's work. So if you're with us here and you have not subscribed, give us a subscribe and help us to reach 500,000 subscribers. We believe that God is expanding our reach here for such a time as this, so we can bring you a message of truth in a time when truth is sorely needed. Okay, you say Bibi has 32 seats, his Likud party. But in order to form a government, you need 62 seats in Israel's Knesset. That's their version of the parliament, Israel's Knesset. Likud only has 32. But you're telling me I need 61. 61. I said 62. I'm sorry. You need 61 seats to form a governing coalition. Well, how will Bibi get to 61 seats, that magic number where he can lead a coalition? He needs partners. And what he has done this time around is he has partnered with strictly right-wing and Israeli, what's called religious parties in Israel. Before, he had to form coalitions with people that perhaps he didn't ideologically get along with. And that's a major reason why those coalitions ultimately unraveled and Israel had to go to a new round of elections. So right now, Netanyahu's Likud party, remember, he's got to get to 61 in order to become prime minister. Likud is partnering with the Religious Zionism Party. They won 14 seats, it looks like. So that gets you to 46 seats. Likud and Religious Zionism together, 46 seats. You need 61. That brings us to the Shas party, SHAS, an ultra-Orthodox party. They've got 11 seats. So that brings you to 57, if I am not mistaken. And then lastly, United Torah Judaism. That's the fourth party that Bibi's Likud party is aligning with. They've got 8 seats. That brings you to 65. Likud, Religious Zionism, Shas, and United Torah Judaism combined, that brings you to 65 seats, that 4-party coalition. And that's where we're at. So Bibi has, if this holds, and if the election result holds, which we anticipate it will, that brings you to 65 seats in the Knesset. That's 4 over than what he needs. Remember, you need 61. The Bibi-led coalition, Likud-led coalition, right now, it looks like they'll have 65, a pretty healthy margin. Again, the next nearest competitor, you would say it's the anti-Bibi bloc, the anti-Netanyahu bloc, led by Yesh Atid, Yair Lapid's Yesh Atid party. Yesh Atid had 24 seats, and they formed a coalition with a few others, and that coalition couldn't pass 61. They couldn't get to that 61 seat number. But again, the Bibi-led coalition looks like it's done exactly that. It looks like they're holding pretty steady at 65. But folks, I'm just careful. You know, I said at the outset here, I'm just careful because everyone's saying he's near victory. He's very close. He's right there. It appears he's won. It looks insurmountable. But folks, as a guy in the journalism game, the media game, you got to be careful. You got to double, triple check and double, triple source. So I think we'll just be safe here and say it looks like he's going to win. He's on the verge of victory. And hopefully tomorrow, Thursday, November 3rd, I can say all the votes are in. Lapid conceded. Bibi declared victory. This is a done deal. And Israel now has a new governing coalition. And that's how we're going to treat it today here on the newscast. And again, the governing coalition, Likud, led by Benjamin Netanyahu, the Likud party, the most popular party in Israel, every election cycle. And remember, this was Israel's 5th election in under 4 years since 2019. Can you believe it? In under 4 years, 5 elections. And in each and every election, Likud comes out on top, folks. They're the Benjamin Netanyahu's Likud party. And I know he's got a lot of enemies among Israel's political class as well. And a lot of people said, I'm tired of Bibi. Nevertheless, Bibi maintains tremendous popularity in many quarters of Israel, clearly, because once again, the Likud party came out on top, and they do every election cycle. The problem in previous cycles, as I mentioned a minute ago, was Likud would get, say, 30 seats, but you need to get to 61. And they maybe had trouble forming a coalition. Maybe they'd put some partners together and they'd get to 60 or 59. Now it appears he has a solid coalition that brings him to 65 seats in the Knesset. Fascinating time. A fascinating individual is Benjamin Netanyahu. You know, he was recently on TBN, did an incredible interview for an hour with Matt Crouch, who heads up TBN. And Matt just asked him really some probing questions probing in a good way, about his family, like good things, interesting things, because usually you see Bibi on US TV and he's grilled about a Palestinian state and all these issues. But Matt asked him about his brother, Yoni Netanyahu, who was killed in the Entebbe raid. I believe it was 1976 or 77, the Entebbe raid. And Yoni was killed in that raid. It had a profound impact on Bibi's life. I encourage you to check that out on tbn.org. The Bibi interview, it aired last Tuesday, I believe. I think that was October 25th on TBN. Great interview by Matt Crouch of Benjamin Netanyahu. Remember, Bibi has a new book out as well. So he's kind of doing the media rounds, his autobiography, his life story. So, hey, a fascinating figure, a great leader, in my view, no doubt. Met with him as part of a delegation back in late April in Jerusalem. Joel Rosenberg, my good friend from All Israel News, best-selling author, led the first ever evangelical delegation of media and business leaders to visit Bahrain and the UAE. I was part of that, and we ended up in Jerusalem, where we met with Benjamin Netanyahu. An off-the-record meeting, can't detail what was said, But I can say that a lot of people have said, well, he's 70 years old and he's already served 15 years. And the media there has been so against him, just like they've treated Trump in the United States. A lot of similarities there. Why would he want to come back and put his family through that? Again, 70-year-old guy. He's kind of done it all. Longest serving prime minister in Israel's history, has had tremendous success as a leader. Well, folks, I've got one word for you: Iran. I interviewed Bibi's former chief of staff, Ron Dermer, last weekend in Jerusalem. Now, Dermer was Bibi's chief of staff. He was Israel's ambassador to the United States for 7.5 years, probably the most critical diplomatic position in the Israeli government. Ron Dermer knows Bibi like no one else. And someone asked, is that a Philadelphia Eagles shirt? Although my Eagles are doing great, this is a Phillies shirt, Larry Brown. I see his comment there, but thank you for noticing. So Dermer knows Bibi better than anyone. And I asked Dermer during our interview, which, by the way, you will see on our TBN Watchman show next week. Thursday, gosh, is that November 10th. It will air on TBN, 10 p.m. Eastern time. Check that out. And we will be posting clips from that very important interview with Ron Dermer here on the news channel on YouTube as well. But I asked him, do you think that Bibi sees himself as a Churchillian figure, meaning a figure of destiny? Just as Churchill saw the gathering storm of Nazi Germany, he was a voice crying in the wilderness in many ways. Does Bibi see himself as a similar figure when it comes to Iran and the Iran nuclear program? Dermer said, absolutely. And folks, there you have it. Netanyahu could have stayed in political retirement if he wanted. He could have said, I'm retiring. I'm done with this. I'm going to live out my years, my 70s, my 80s, peacefully with my wife in Caesarea along the Mediterranean coast, catch some rays and write my memoirs and ride off into the sunset. But no, especially with the media hounding him at his heels at every turn. But no, he came back, not for personal edification or gratification. He came back because he believes he is the man to deal with Iran. Perhaps there are others in Israel who, if they had that leadership mantle, they would also do a good job on Iran. I don't know. What I do know is that when it comes to this Iran issue, Bibi gets it. And I believe he can be trusted to do the right thing for the nation of Israel. And if he does the right thing for the nation of Israel vis-a-vis Iran and countering that threat, then that benefits the world. Because, folks, a nuclear Iran is not only a threat to the state of Israel. Yes, close proximity to Israel, geographic proximity, relatively so, both in the Middle East, of course, opposite ends. But that Iran nuclear program threatens the Sunni Arab world, the Saudis especially. We'll talk more about that in a minute. And they know that all too well. Why do you think these nations ultimately signed on to the Abraham Accords peace treaties with Israel? There were a lot of reasons. But that looming Iranian threat that threatens the entire region was arguably the main reason. Iran's nuclear program clearly threatens Europe as Iran extends its ballistic missile range. And Iran's nuclear program threatens the United States as Iran continues to try to develop intercontinental ballistic missiles, ICBMs. Folks, they do exactly what their name says. ICBMs are designed to travel across continents, travel across oceans, and you develop them for one reason and one reason only: to mount them with a nuclear warhead. Now, those ICBMs, they're not for Israel. They're not for Saudi Arabia. They're not even for Europe. Those ICBMs are for the nation that Iran considers the great Satan, the United States. Now, remember, in that Iranian ideology, that Iranian eschatology, Iranian regime, I should say, they consider Israel the little Satan. It's America that they call the great Satan, and America that is really the ultimate prize. Hence, the ICBM program. Reminder, questions, bring them. We're going to go last 15, 20 minutes with some questions as well. So keep them coming in the comments, and we'll be pulling them up. Okay, let's see if we have any updates here. I don't think we do. I don't know, folks, that we will have this thing officially called until tomorrow, Thursday the 3rd. Let's see here, just pardon me as I look down at my phone, monitoring this all very closely. I'm seeing here, again, close to 90% ballots counted, and Bibi's Likud is sitting very firmly at 32 seats, and the coalition has reached 65 overall, and that crosses that 61-seat threshold. Okay, ramifications. Again, we're assuming that Bibi is going to be prime minister once again. What are the ramifications? Number one, for Israel, I think it means there's a few things here. I think it means, number one, a strong Israel, clearly, an Israel that will stand strong in the face of the looming Iranian threat. Bibi also was really, so national security, you're rock solid with Bibi leading the new government. So he's proven that, proven track record. Secondly, on the economic front, you have to believe Israel will be rock solid. Bibi is a capitalist. He understands that capitalism is a good thing for nations and socialism is not a good thing. Bibi really gets a lot of credit for being the driving force in Israel, moving towards a more capitalistic economic system and putting the old socialistic ways behind. Remember, Israel was a socialistic country upon its founding, and Bibi really moved Israel more and more past that. And what has been the result? Great prosperity for Israel. No doubt Israel is booming as a scientific, high-tech power, small businesses, the innovation nation. Some have called it the startup nation. That was the title of a best-selling book a few years ago about Israel. Everywhere you go in Israel and in Jerusalem, there's construction. Things are happening. Things are moving. There's a sense of excitement in the air. It reminds me of how the U.S. used to be such a bastion, a frontier of innovation, exciting inventions coming, and entrepreneurship. We're seeing that, and I say used to, in the U.S. I pray we can get that back, and I think next Tuesday, the election here, the midterm elections, could move potentially the U.S. in the right direction on that front, but certainly Israel is now the innovation nation. There's a spirit of entrepreneurship. I don't want to say a Wild West spirit, that gives the wrong impression, but there's a spirit of, hey, I've got an idea. Let's talk about this. Let's see if we can make it happen. Wow, you'll pay me for it? Let's do it. And then all of a sudden you see that made in Israel idea around the world. You're holding it in your hands in the form of these phones. And that's only the beginning. The Israeli innovation, we could go on and on with everything Israel's working on, including medical. A few years ago, I interviewed someone in Israel who was working to do away with kidney dialysis machines. If there's a cure for cancer or Alzheimer's found, folks, and I hope it's found soon, as a patriotic American, I in a way, it pains me to say it, but I believe that cure will very likely be found in Israel. It doesn't pain me to say it. I shouldn't say that. I love the United States. I love when we do good. But I think Israel, when it comes to cures for what ails you, whatever it is, Israel's on the cutting edge of that as well. I say all that to say that Netanyahu will encourage and harness that in the best possible way. So that's a good thing. I did mention earlier, Israel, look, Bibi has many political enemies, including some on the right wing he's had fallings out with over the years. Lapid refuses to serve in a coalition with him. Benny Gantz, the current defense minister, has refused to serve in a coalition with him. Avigdor Lieberman, Gideon Sa'ar, the list goes on of former Netanyahu coalition partners or allies. Naftali Bennett, who was prime minister up until June 2022 for a year. All of them have been at loggerheads with Bibi. So he's got some political enemies for sure, but clearly he's got some friends as well. And who are these friends? Who is this coalition? Let's take a look real quick, folks. 1 second here. Again, as we run down the parties for you, because you might be wondering what is going on here. 1 second here. Likud. If you're just joining us, 4:25 Eastern Time. Benjamin Netanyahu on the verge of a major victory to once again lead Israel. It's almost official. We're getting close. Likud, Benjamin Netanyahu's party, 32 seats, it looks like. Religious Zionism, we got to talk about them, 14 seats. Shas, S-H-A-S, 11 seats. And United Torah Judaism, 8 seats. So it's a mix of right-wing and religious parties. Now, who is this coalition? If you've been following the mainstream media coverage of all of this over the past few weeks, Bibi's coalition, according to the mainstream media and the left, is filled with wild-eyed religious zealots and right-wing extremists and even fascists. That's literally the rhetoric being used about this coalition. Now, when it comes to Shas and United Torah Judaism, I know he's partnered with Shas in the past. That's an Orthodox party in Israel, and United Torah Judaism as well. Their main point of contention, by their, I mean the left and the mainstream media, is the religious Zionism party led by, I hope I'm pronouncing his name right, Bezalel Smotrich. I hope I'm close there with my pronunciation. And the guy who really made headlines throughout this election cycle in Israel, Itamar Ben-Gvir. Now, during our election preview special, which aired on Friday, October 28th, or was posted that day on the channel, again, check that out in our archives under Newscast. It's right there. The title is, or the thumbnail says, Will Bibi Prevail? Our two guests broke down the background of Itamar Ben-Gvir, why he is so controversial. Essentially, folks, in days prior, when he was a younger man, he followed a guy by the name of Meir Kahane, and his Kach party, K-A-C-H, was banned in Israel. A lot of anti-Arab rhetoric. And again, his party banned in Israel. Ben-Gvir was in that direction years ago in the 90s as a younger man, no doubt. He says he has changed. He says he does not subscribe to those views anymore that he had when he was a young man. He's matured, and he's matured. He's changed as a person. He's refined his viewpoints. We're likely about to find out as he's part of this governing coalition. But he still takes a very hard line against anti-Israel rhetoric among Arab parties in the Knesset and among terrorists and jihadists who wish to destroy the Jewish state. Ben-Gvir certainly takes a very hardline stance, no doubt. And he stirred things up a bit, I guess you would say, from time to time, going up to the Temple Mount, going into various Arab neighborhoods in Jerusalem, which he has every right to do, by the way. No doubt. But obviously the left hated it. Anti-Israel Arab factions hated that, and they blamed Ben-Gvir for incitement. We are about to see, folks. He will have likely a ministerial position in Israel. Let's see where he's at. Let's see how this all goes with Itamar Ben-Gvir, with Bezalel Smotrich. They will have likely some pretty important, influential ministerial positions in this new government. But that's the party, folks, as you hear, and I'm looking at the reporting here. Right-wing extremists win the Israel election. Fascists win the Israel election. I'm seeing the rhetoric, the predictable rhetoric from the mainstream media and from the left. Now, on the flip side, when radical leftists win elections, which they're doing increasingly in places like Latin America, by the way, look no further than Brazil this past week. Do you ever see headlines like that? Left-wing extremists, left-wing fascists. Do you ever see headlines like that? And believe me, the left, it can be very, very much fascist, as we're seeing right now. Lula da Silva, a hardcore socialist, Marxist, leftist, an ex-con who was just released from prison on corruption charges in 2019, who has been a friend of Iran and an opponent of Israel. He just won the election in Brazil, the 5th most populous country in the world and the largest country in South America. What did the headlines say? With a track record like that, you'd think the headlines might say Marxist, left-wing extremist, friend of Iran, anti-Israel activist, anti-Western act, but no. It just said leftist candidate Lula da Silva. He's just a leftist. He's just like AOC or, even like a Nancy Pelosi. He's just a leftist. Folks, this is the kind of coverage you're getting. So let's see what we have here in Israel. The hypocrisy of the mainstream media and the left knows no bounds, as we know. We could go ad nauseum on that, but I don't want to get sidetracked too much. But I lay that out for you just as a signal to be alert and be aware as you look at coverage of this election. Itamar Ben-Gvir certainly has a checkered past, no doubt. No doubt. He's a controversial figure. Let's see how it goes. Netanyahu, who I trust, has said, okay, I will partner with this party, the religious Zionism party. I will partner with this individual. Let's see how it goes. Let's see how it goes. The jury is out. But what appears certain is, again, Bibi will be prime minister. Now, we covered what it means for Israel. We covered what it means. And look, Ben-Gvir is polarizing, and we'll see what happens there. And the U.S. is completely polarized. We'll see what happens internally in Israel. What about the Israel-U.S. relationship? Now, this is interesting. And I feel for Bibi, I have to say, folks, because he's been prime minister. This will be his third go-round as prime minister, 15 years overall. Excuse me. The first go-round between 1996 and 99, when Benjamin Netanyahu was prime minister, Bill Clinton was president of the United States. For much of his second go-round as prime minister, from 2009 till early 2017, Barack Obama was president of the United States. Bibi had one 4-year window between 2017 and 2021, early 21, where he worked with really someone who was a friend, and that was Donald Trump. But for 11 of those 15 years at the helm, he was dealing with liberal, I'd say leftist, Barack Obama, clearly, Democrat presidents. In the case of Obama, who were openly hostile to Israel and Israel's interests, and openly hostile on a personal level to Benjamin Netanyahu. What about Joe Biden? A few things here. Number one, Biden was vice president under Barack Obama. Excuse me. And he is well aware of the hostility, that's the only word you can use, that Obama showed towards Netanyahu. He's well aware that there was not a good relationship there at all. Bibi actually wrote about it in his brand new book recently. He laid out how he was mistreated by the Obama administration. Again, Biden was a pivotal member of that administration serving as vice president. So you got all that baggage, all that background that he brings into the relationship with Benjamin Netanyahu. Not only that, you have Joe Biden surrounded by radical leftists at every level, at the upper echelons of his government, of his administration right now, certainly many of whom are not too friendly towards Israel. Not only that, you've got a critical juncture here on Iran. And the Biden administration has made very clear that they want a new Iran deal. Yeah, it's on hold right now, folks. And the Biden administration is saying, hey, as long as Iran is supplying Russia with drones in Ukraine, and Iran is cracking the heads of its people in the streets as these protests continue, then the nuclear deal is off the table. We won't even talk about it right now. But folks, never say never. I've described this Iran nuclear deal as kind of like a vampire or a zombie that doesn't seem to die. Just when you think it's dead, it's revived. And the Biden administration wants these protests, and I hope they don't die. I shouldn't say that. I stand corrected. I hope these protests do not die down. I hope they lead to the toppling of the Iranian regime. If these protests did die down, and if the Ukraine issue somehow died down, I don't see that happening. Put it this way. The Biden administration and the West, Britain, France, Germany, not clear about Britain yet with the new prime minister, but France and Germany certainly, oh, they are looking for an opening to revive that deal and get the talks going once again with the Iranian regime. Folks, just when you think that Iran deal is dead, it comes back. And yes, right now it appears dead in the water, but don't hold your breath that that will be permanent. And Benjamin Netanyahu is going to have to deal with that. Remember, this is a man who spoke twice before a joint session of the U.S. Congress. I was at one of those joint sessions in attendance as Netanyahu implored the United States to not sign the Iran nuclear deal. The Obama administration in 2015 ignored, and they did exactly that. They signed the deal. Disaster has ensued. So Biden, Netanyahu, how will that relationship be? And one of the key factors here is And we're already hearing rumblings about this. The Biden administration is not happy about this coalition. They don't like Bibi, of course, but they don't like this religious Zionism party that I mentioned earlier. Itamar Ben-Gvir, Bezalel Smotrich. The left in the U.S. is saying this is an extremist, right-wing, fascist party, a racist party. That's what they're saying. So they are not eager to work with this coalition on that front. Many American Jews as well. Some American Jewish groups reportedly expressing misgivings as well. Obviously, U.S. Jews, at least. It's interesting because Israel certainly has moved to the right. It's a right-leaning country. The left, Labor Party, Meretz, the largest left-wing parties, didn't register barely in this Israeli election. Labor did better than Meretz, but neither did well. Israel has gone to the right. In the United States, most of the Jewish population, a good chunk, is certainly more liberal and votes for Democrats. And some in that population already have expressed concerns about this new coalition in Israel. So that bears watching as well. Friction, potential friction between the new coalition and the U.S. on a few different levels. This bears watching. These are just points I wanted to bring out, things that could potentially happen. Lastly, when it comes to Iran, that's the other big thing we're watching, and the Abraham Accords. Now, let's go with Iran first. Well, we kind of just hit on that, right? You know, Bibi is going to be tough on Iran. We all know, if you watch a newscast on a regular basis, you all know that there is eventually going to be that showdown in the region. I think part of that obviously has to deal with Iran's nuclear program, certainly. I've also talked about the Great Northern War that Israel is facing, where it will be eventually facing off against Iran and Hezbollah and their various jihadi proxies in Lebanon and Syria. Of course, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, the Houthis, the militias in Iraq and Syria will throw their hats in the ring as well. And that ring of fire that surrounds Israel will be activated. What will be the trigger for that? Could it be an Israeli strike on Iran's nuclear program? Could that be the trigger? And also, we're talking Isaiah 17, the demise of Damascus, and a precursor to Ezekiel 38 and 39, the war of Gog and Magog. We're talking prophetic now. Where does Iran's nuclear program fit into that? And will Israel act? I think there's a lot better chance that Benjamin Netanyahu does act. And folks, again, he's 70 years old. I believe 70 years. I think he's 70, maybe 71, but certainly he's at least 70. And he's at the point now where he's saying, I've done it all. Think about it. He could have gone off into the sunset. He could be sitting on a rocking chair in Caesarea staring at the Mediterranean right now. And he didn't. He chose to come back against the fierce opposition of the left, the global left, and the global mainstream media, not just in Israel. And he did it. So I don't want to say he's got nothing to lose. That's certainly not accurate. But at this point, if you're Bibi, you got to be saying, you know what? I've got a mandate. I've got a majority. Again, the people of Israel have picked me. They've picked me in large part because they trust me on national security issues, chief among them, Iran. So you have to think at this point, Bibi is saying, I'm going to do what needs to be done, leave the consequences to God Almighty and let the chips fall where they may. The world will howl, but I'm going to do, as the leader of Israel, just as the leader of the United States, the leader of Great Britain, the leader of whatever nation, should do what's best for their nation first. Netanyahu is going to say, I'm going to do what's best for Israel, regardless of whether the world likes it. The world, who? The UN, which recently called on Israel to give up its nuclear weapons. I just reported on that here in the newscast on Monday. Again, check it out in our archives. We got a lot of traction with that video. The world. Folks, the world, by and large, has turned away from God, has turned away from the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So pardon me if I'm not going to go with the world, especially as a Christian, a follower of Jesus. I ain't going with the world. I'm following Jesus. Now, Bibi is not a follower of Jesus, but I believe Bibi will do what needs to be done to keep Israel secure. And he's going to say, you know what? Joe Biden or whoever, Emmanuel Macron in France, hey, I appreciate your concerns and I appreciate your opinions on this, but I'm going to do what needs to be done for Israel. I'm not the prime minister, the president of the United States or France. I'm the leader of Israel. And I have to be concerned with the people of Israel and the nation of Israel first and foremost. So I'm going to do what I need to do, what I feel is best as the man that the people of Israel have elected again for this position, for this mantle. And it's going to get very, very interesting, folks. So fasten your seatbelt. And again, I feel for Bibi that, he's got Biden in there. He's going to have to deal. The closest relationship that Israel has, obviously, is the United States. And more than any leader, Benjamin Netanyahu is going to deal with Joe Biden. As long as Joe Biden is coherent and cogent and in office, Benjamin Netanyahu is going to have to deal with him and deal with his administration. And it might not always be pleasant because they're going to disagree on the Iran nuclear deal and how to confront Iran. They're going to disagree on the Palestinian issue. You know it. The Biden administration is going to turn up the heat and push for a Palestinian state once again. Bibi will resist that. And you got a preview of it. I mentioned that report about the UN voting by a vote of 152-5, overwhelmingly, and many European nations shamefully abstaining, voting neither no or yes on a demand for Israel to give up its nuclear weapons. Folks, Israel has never confirmed nor denied that it possesses nuclear weapons. They officially have a policy of nuclear ambiguity, meaning we ain't saying whether we have them or not. Most believe Israel has possessed nuclear weapons since the 1960s, most likely. And sadly, Israel needs everything it can. It needs to have everything it can in its military in its arsenal at its disposal, because it's surrounded by enemies who are devoted to its destruction. So Israel wisely has taken the steps to prevent that. And part of that clearly is that capability to have those kinds of weapons of mass destruction. Now, big difference. You might say, well, why can Israel have them and Iran can't? Do we really even have to answer that question? Are we really going to put Israel and Iran, the Iranian regime, on the same moral footing? Israel, again, has possessed nuclear weapons probably for about 60 years, never used them, never even threatened to use them. Iran is threatening to destroy other nations already, and they don't even have the bomb yet. Imagine what they would do, the Iranian regime, when they had the bomb, because, folks, their ideology demands that they destroy Israel. What's the first rule of war? Sun Tzu, know your enemy. If you do not understand the ideology of the Iranian regime, you cannot defeat the regime. Their ideology demands destruction, apocalyptic destruction. I don't exaggerate. I don't want to get too in the weeds here. We're going to questions in a minute. But the Iranian regime wants to usher in the return of the one they call the Mahdi, or the 12th Imam. I know it sounds crazy, but essentially he is their Messiah, an Islamic Messiah. They believe they can usher in his return during a time of great global chaos. Nothing says chaos more than a nuclear showdown, right? This is what they believe. Perhaps we'll unpack this on a future live stream or a future newscast, but this is what the Iranian regime believes, and they really believe it. And I've said it before, and we'll say it again before we get to questions here. If the 20th century taught us anything, the century of Mao, Saddam, Hitler, Stalin, Castro, it taught us that when evil men tell you they want to kill you, you should probably listen to them and take them very seriously. What I do isn't brain surgery. I simply observe the statements of the Iranian regime, and I take them very seriously. And so does Benjamin Netanyahu. So I believe Israel is in very good hands right now. And hopefully by tomorrow's newscast, Thursday, November 3rd, we can say it is official. Benjamin Netanyahu is indeed, once again, Israel's leader. I mentioned that plot. Let's get the questions. Send them along. We've got about 15 minutes left. I mentioned that U.S. and Saudi officials are on high alert. Their forces in the Middle East right now are on high alert. They are concerned reportedly about a potential Iranian attack on the Saudi energy infrastructure, meaning certainly oil installations. Not the first time. September 2019, Iran fired drones and ballistic missiles at Saudi oil facilities, shut down a chunk of the world's oil supply for a better part of that day back in September 2019. That was a little teaser of what Iran can do if it wants to affect the world's oil supply, not to even mention a potential shutdown of the Strait of Hormuz. But what we're talking about here is a potential attack not only against Saudi Arabia, but against Iraqi Kurdistan. Obviously, the Kurds have been friends of the United States. And Iran is blaming the Saudis and the Kurds and the U.S. and Israel for these ongoing protests that continue to rock the Iranian regime. They're looking for scapegoats, and they're looking to deflect attention from what's going on the streets of Iran. Folks, the regime is in trouble right now. I don't know that they'll eventually be overthrown as a result of these protests, but certainly they're feeling major, major heat. I don't want to say they're teetering, but they're in trouble. They're in trouble. The problem with that is that every time they've been in trouble over the past 23 years, and this is just the latest series of protests that we've seen, every time they're in trouble, they seem to take it to another level in terms of violence and brutal depravity and crackdowns. That's the concern. Already, they've killed hundreds of protesters. They announced yesterday that they will put 1,000 protesters on trial in a public show trial, and many of them will face the death penalty. The big question is, how far are the protesters, I guess, willing to go? Are they all in? Are they going to be in the streets for the foreseeable future? They're not backing down. And how far is the regime willing to go? We know how far the regime is willing to go. It's very far, sadly. And Ibrahim Raisi, the current Iranian president, there's a reason his nickname is the Butcher of Tehran, because during the late 1980s, he personally oversaw, as a member of Iran's judiciary, the execution of hundreds, if not thousands, of Iranian dissidents. So this is who you have at the helm right now, and they are willing to go very far. Stay tuned. Pray for the people of Iran, folks. They need it right now. Prayer works. And remember, the largest growing Christian church in the world is in Iran. Yes, against all odds, against the relentless persecution of the Iranian regime, the church in Iran is growing by leaps and bounds. It's largely an underground church, but it's growing because you can't stop the gospel. If history, I mentioned history a minute ago, if history has taught us anything, it is that you cannot stop the gospel. And it marches on even in Iran because the message of Jesus is eternal. It's a message of life. Questions? Questions. Send them along, folks, in the time we have left here. Okay, here we have. Sorry, just looking at the questions here. Here's a good one from Melcy Welsey. I like that handle. Okay, from Texas. Erick, do you think a red wave on November 8th will wipe the Iran deal off the table? There's a good chance. Good question. A few things here. Number one, if projections hold, we will indeed see a red wave, and more analysts are saying that the Senate is in play right now for Republicans. So we still have 6 days to go. We shall see. Things look promising for Republicans right now, very promising to say the least, as the American people, in many cases, thankfully, are fed up with the left-wing madness that we've seen over the past few years and the attack on the American family. The list goes on and on. So, assuming we do have a red wave, and even if Republicans only take the House, yes, they could create obstacles to that Iran nuclear deal. There could be hearings. I know you said, wow, hearings, who cares? But more than hearings, there could be a lot of accountability for the Biden administration. Hearings, you might roll your eyes. I know they can be boring, but if you're bringing top Biden administration officials in front of the nation, say in the House or the Senate, and you're demanding answers about this Iran deal, hey, then there is almost a public expose. Why are we doing this deal? On what authority are you doing this deal? The Senate and the House, we're against it. They could block it. The Senate and the House could veto any kind of bill that comes forth proposing a deal. Here's the problem. The Biden administration and President Biden could just have an executive action and try and push the deal through that way. You might say he can't do that. Stranger things have happened. So let's see. He could certainly try to push this through executive means. But certainly it would be helpful to have opposition to this in the House and Senate, majority opposition. Okay, let's see. When would Bibi be in the official office? Good question. When will Jean Guy ask, or Jean Guy? Good question, when he will be sworn in. I will have that info for you tomorrow. How's that? I'm waiting for the official result first. You would think he'd be sworn in fairly soon. And this coalition would take office pretty soon, I believe. And Yair Lapid would then be the opposition leader, back in the opposition where he was before. And there's still a lot of lingering animosity over that maritime deal that Yair Lapid, his interim government, they only were in control for 4 months, and yet he signed that major deal with Lebanon, that essentially a natural gas deal redefining Israel's maritime border in the Mediterranean with Lebanon, allowing Lebanon to potentially extract natural gas out of the Mediterranean. Now, Israel will reportedly get royalties on any of those Lebanese finds, but the big concern is, was this a capitulation to Hezbollah and Iran? Remember, Hezbollah is the main power broker in Lebanon. And will Hezbollah and Iran benefit from these natural gas extractions? Will they benefit financially? And if they benefit financially, that means they are using any money that goes into their coffers to fund terrorism. So a lot of concern. And no one asked this question, but I'm putting it out there. What's Bibi going to do about that maritime deal? Will he pull out of that perhaps? And by the way, I meant to mention this earlier, the Abraham Accords. When Netanyahu was in office, Israel made peace with the UAE, Bahrain, Morocco, Sudan, and Ron Dermer, I mentioned earlier, who was Bibi's chief of staff, was very involved in those Abraham Accords discussions, and David Friedman, the former U.S. ambassador to Israel. They have both told me on camera that we had a few other nations lined up. And if President Trump was reelected and working with Netanyahu, continuing to work with Netanyahu throughout the first half of 2021, we very likely would have had more nations sign on to the Abraham Accords, and that very likely would have included Saudi Arabia. And that's the big one, folks, when we're talking about the Abraham Accords, Israel and Saudi Arabia. Is that back on the table, number one, now that Netanyahu is back in office? Secondly, will Bibi have an advocate for this in the Biden administration? The Biden administration in the early days pretty much ignored the Abraham Accords. They have not advanced the ball down the field when it comes to those treaties with new countries. They haven't shown a lot of interest. Really, they've said some nice things in recent months, like, hey, the Abraham Accords, it's good. But they haven't shown any inclination to expand those, any commitment. So is Bibi going to nudge Biden on that? It's going to be very interesting. Fasten your seatbelts. Okay. Let's see what we have here. Some more questions. Okay, there it is. Darren Johnston. Is it likely that Bibi will undo that maritime deal that Lapid signed with Lebanon? That would, in one sense, just to hit on that again real quick before we move on, he could do it. It depends on how strongly Bibi feels about that deal. If he thinks it was an absolute disaster and a capitulation, then yeah, there's a chance he could. But you got to think pulling out of that would really increase hostilities with Lebanon. Already, Israel and Lebanon do not have diplomatic relations, number one. Number two, Hezbollah calls Lebanon home and is the most powerful force in Lebanon. I'm not saying Bibi won't do it, but does he want to do that right away? right when he takes office, or does he want to give this a little time and see how this deal pans out, how it goes, give it a few months and see how it all goes? We'll see. But certainly there's a possibility, not a guarantee, but a possibility, yeah, maybe he will pull out of that maritime deal. Maybe not right away, but perhaps eventually. Okay, let's see what we have here. Some more questions today. More people asking about that Lebanon deal. I'm impressed. People have been watching that closely, and rightfully so. Do you think Iran, this is a good question from Wim Visser. Do you think Iran will be more aggressive now? And I think there's a very good chance, folks. Number one, we just told you a minute ago about this apparent Iranian plot against Saudi Arabia and Iraqi Kurdistan. U.S. and Saudi militaries on high alert in the region. I don't think Iran has obviously an obsessive genocidal hatred for the nation of Israel, but they seem to have a special animus for Bibi Netanyahu. And if I'm Bibi, I wear that as a badge of honor and a compliment. Hey, Bibi hit them left and right. I mean, not only, and look, Bennett and Lapid continued that policy of pushing Iran back in Syria, of striking Iran and Hezbollah at Israel's doorstep in Syria. To their credit, they continued it. But Bibi was the man who started it all. Around 2012, he said, red line, we're not going to let this happen. We're not going to allow Iranian entrenchment. We've already got it in Lebanon in the form of Hezbollah at our doorstep. We're not going to allow it to develop in Syria as well. Many daring operations carried out under Netanyahu against Iran, including on Iranian soil, against different computer viruses, against Iran's nuclear program. I think of the Stuxnet computer virus. And obviously in 2018, that great heist by the Mossad when they were able to get hold of a treasure trove of Iran's nuclear documents from Tehran and smuggle them out. What an operation there. And of course, the death of Mohsen Fakhrizadeh occurred in November 2020 on Netanyahu's watch, the godfather of Iran's nuclear program. And Bibi was also in office in January 2020 when Qasem Soleimani, the not so dearly departed Iranian terror master, was killed in a U.S. drone strike. So Iran has a lot of animus for Benjamin Netanyahu on a personal level and a genocidal animus for the nation of Israel and the Jewish people. So could Iran start acting up? Yeah, there's a very good chance, not only with the new coalition in Israel. Look, Iran has a demonic hatred of Israel, even more so if it's possible of Bibi, I think, because of all he did to weaken the Iranian regime and its nefarious efforts. But also Iran having major problems with the protest at home. And they want that nuclear deal, the Iranian regime. And they want to drag the US and drag Europe back to the negotiating table. And usually when Iran wants to do that and they want concessions and they want a deal, they don't play nice. They lash out and they try to intimidate and bully and blackmail you back to the negotiating table. The sad thing is, the current administration in the US and various European countries just might take the bait and cave and give in to the blackmail and the extortion, and the Iranian regime knows that. So yeah, very good chance they will act up. Last question, then we got to roll. Let's see, we got, wow, some good questions here. Man, here's a good one then. How do you think Bibi's win will affect the Russia-Ukraine war? I don't think it's going to affect the war, but will it affect, the big question I think is, will it affect Russia-Israel relations and Ukraine-Israel relations? Obviously, Putin and Netanyahu had a good relationship when Bibi was prime minister. Bibi traveled to Moscow frequently to meet with Putin, basically to solidify what was called that deconfliction mechanism in Syria, where Israel continued to carry out airstrikes against Iran and Hezbollah, and Russian troops in Syria stood back and allowed it to happen. They gave Israel, they didn't give Israel. Israel can take it as a sovereign nation, but Iran certainly didn't intervene when Israel carried out strikes in Syria. Now what? Because, man, we've seen tensions increasing between Israel and Russia in recent months. We've been documenting it here in the newscast. Lastly, Ukraine and Israel. Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, has been pressuring Israel incessantly to provide Iron Dome and provide more military assistance and more military hardware. What will Bibi do? Bennett and Lapid took a middle ground between. Lapid was much more pro-Ukraine vocally than Bennett was, but they essentially played a neutral role publicly because they didn't want to anger Russia. Considering Bibi's previous solid relationship with Putin, and I'm sure he has a solid relationship with Zelensky as well, where will Netanyahu go here? I think that's one of the major issues facing him as he takes the premiership once again. It looks very certainly like he's going to do that. So a lot going on, a lot of topics for future newscast, including tomorrow. Until then, go Phillies. Hopefully we'll have a result tomorrow, an official 100% result that Benjamin Netanyahu is the prime minister, and we can really start seeing what lies ahead. God bless you all. Thanks for joining us. Until tomorrow, remember, never hold your peace. Hey everyone, thanks for checking out the Watchman Newscast. If you enjoyed this episode and want to see more, make sure you go ahead and hit the like button, click subscribe, and tap the bell icon to turn on notifications for new Watchman Newscast episodes every weekday.